Hey everybody, what's up? I'm Ehren. Welcome to Question Period Canada. It's been a hell of a week. It's been really exciting. Yesterday there was a big fight between Pierre Poilievre and Greg Fergus, the new House Speaker. They went toe-to-toe. I think Pierre probably won. Earlier in the week, Alan Reyes, an independent, an orphaned MP, dropped a bomb that nobody has touched since. They shut down Parliament afterwards. Anyhow, we'll jump straight into the episode. And so we're going to start right now. We'll go. But first, I'd like to let you know a little bit about me. I'm Ehren. I started this channel. We're going to be working hard at it. We're making it work. If you have any feedback, things you'd like to see, things you'd like changed, please get in touch. I'd love any of your feedback. That would be great. We're just trying to have some fun while we learn about what's going on in our country. So yeah, we'll jump right into question period, it looks like, and let's get it going.
Questions orales.
All right, questions orales. All right, here we go.
The opposition.
Pierre Poilievre on deck in the batter space.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this Prime Minister, he's not worth the cost of housing, which doubled since he took power. The middle class in Ontario, a couple sold their house to buy a castle in France, a 6,000-foot castle on 37 acres. They said they couldn't sell that castle to buy a house in Ontario. Why is it more expensive to be a member of the middle class in Canada?
It's a good question. Why
than
is
an aristocrat in France?
There's no middle class left. There's poor people and there's a lot of us and rich people.
The Honourable Minister. I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question.
Champagne is pretty fun. He's
There's
a wild
one thing
man.
the Leader of the Opposition can do. Just one to help Canadians. It's to vote for our Affordability Act.
He's animated.
We want to reform competitiveness, but we want to get rid of GST for building new housing. For once, finally, will the opposition vote for Canadians? Yes or no?
I predict he's going to be the next leader of
the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
After
After 8 years, this Prime Minister isn't worth the cost, and another law isn't going to change that. Yesterday, Conservatives raised a question with the Minister of the Environment. We asked if, yes or no, the department had warned this government that its so-called regulations on fossil fuels was going to disproportionately increase costs for people with lower incomes. And the answer is yes. The Bloc wants to increase this regulatory tax. Will this government finally overturn this tax so that Canadians can buy food and housing?
Food and housing, they're the most important things, yeah?
Thank you, Mr.
Stephen
Speaker.
Gabal.
I want to remind the opposition leader
Minister
that
of the
in their
Environment.
campaign platform for 2021, they proposed setting up standards for clean energy. The
He's pretty
difference
fun. He's pretty
between
fun.
us and them is that they just talk about it, whereas we're acting on it. Thanks to the standards in place, thousands, or rather millions, are being invested all over the country to help Canadians reduce their carbon footprint when they use their cars.
It must be hard to be a liberal these days. Like,
The
it's
Honourable
just
Leader
been
of
a
the
tough...
Opposition.
we know that after
Couple of
8
terms.
years, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost of housing, which has doubled since he took office. It's gotten so crazy that the cost of a house in Ontario means that one
lights up.
couple sold their 2,000 square foot home in that province and was able to buy a 6,000 square foot castle on 37 acres of land in France. They now say they could never sell the castle and afford to move back to Canada. Why does it cost more to be a member of the middle class in Canada than to be an aristocrat in France?
Good question. And again, I don't know about this middle class. Middle class people shouldn't... My house is freezing.
Mr. Speaker, we will
turn
take
on the
no
oil.
lessons from the Conservatives.
He's a wild man. He's
Canadians
fun.
will take no lessons from the Conservative, Mr. Speaker. There is one thing, Mr. Speaker, not many I agree, but there's one thing that the Leader of the Opposition can do for Canadians watching at home. Mr. Speaker, is to vote for the affordability bill, Mr. Speaker, that will empower more competitive politician in this country that will reduce GST in new housing, Mr. Speaker. Well,
won't.
once for all, will they vote for Canadian? Yes or no?
He's great. He's great. He's a lot of fun. You agree with him at all? Because I'm not so big on this bill. I don't think that getting rid of GST for people that are for contracting companies that are building these buildings that are only going to
None of the bills are affordable after 8 years of this government.
Tough 8 years, guys.
I asked, why is it that you can buy a castle in France for a lower cost than a middle-class home in Ontario? And his response was basically, let them eat cake, Mr. Speaker. The fact is,
can
people
afford
can't
cake?
even afford bread after 8 years of inflationary policies. Will they reverse their inflationary deficits and reverse their tax hikes so Canadians can eat, heat, and house themselves?
Just to put it out there, the last time I voted Liberal, which was 8 years ago.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, the Leader of the Opposition refuses to explain to Canadians why he won't support legislation that is going to make housing more affordable, that's going to build more rental units for Canadians, that's going to make groceries more affordable. Mr. Speaker, it has been clear that for the past 8 years that they've
Good
been
on you,
in
Karina,
opposition,
getting into
they
it.
haven't done
This is the
anything
most animated
to support
I've ever
Canadians.
seen.
What we do know is that they've constantly voted against measures that support Canadians, like childcare, like the Canada Child Benefit, and like this legislation that they have an opportunity to do the right thing and to vote for Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
That was the most animated I've ever seen her. She's the most boring clown
Leader of the Opposition.
in the House.
They've been promising for 8 years that their bills would lower the cost, but since that time, housing costs have doubled. They promised their carbon tax would make people better off. Then they brought in a second carbon tax. And we asked the government's own officials at committee yesterday if their analysis showed that the cost would rise for energy and that these costs would be borne disproportionately by the poor and middle class, and that government official confirmed that yes. Why is this government taxing the people who can least afford it? Will they admit that after 8 years they're simply not worth the cost?
I don't turn my oil on. I don't get the groceries I want to buy anymore. I used to.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to a study that came out 2 days ago, in Canada, 60%
Not on the
of
paper,
small and
Stephen. Get off
medium-sized
the paper,
business
bud.
across the country have been affected by
letting me
extreme
down.
weather event this year alone. 44% of them say that it has a direct hit on their revenue. What's the response from the Conservative Party? Let's make pollution free again. Let's have more climate change. Let's have more air pollution and water pollution. I think Canadians can take any of the proposition that the Conservative Party of Canada has for them, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah. I thought the carbon tax was a bad idea from the get-go.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie.
It doesn't really
This
do
is
anything
day
besides
13
break people
of the war
financially.
between Israel and Hamas.
to
Humanitarian
improve
needs are
climate.
more
That-
acute than ever. The United
plan.
States pledged $100 million in humanitarian aid. Canada pledged too little. But even more important than money, aid has to be able to reach the civilians who desperately need it. As we speak, only 20 trucks have permission to enter Gaza. According to the United Nations, at least 100 are needed per day. We're far from that goal. Has the Prime Minister spoken to Israel and Egypt to ask for better access to provide humanitarian aid? The Honourable Minister of Global Affairs.
Okay. Melanie Joly?
In fact, the Prime Minister spoke with the Israeli President and the Egyptian President. We have constantly asked for access to provide humanitarian aid to Gaza. Gaza is one of the most difficult places to live right now on the planet. It's important to get aid into Gaza. We're going to continue
Melanie's
to engage
good.
with different countries in the region for that to
That
get
was very
done.
well spoken. Her body language is great.
Monsieur le Président, il y a une chose que le Canada peut faire.
There's
Tyrian's
one thing
not
that
happy
Canada
with
can
the
do on
answer.
the world stage, and that's show humanitarian leadership. I know it's a lot to ask of Egypt in terms of opening its border to Hamas-occupied territory. I know it's a lot to ask of Israel when Hamas is holding 203 hostages, but humanity can only come from them. It can't come from the monsters behind Hamas. Humanitarian aid has to reach civilians. What's the Prime Minister doing to make sure that it gets done quickly? The Honourable Minister for International
All right.
Development.
Ahmed.
The current humanitarian situation is deeply concerning for our government. Civilians are the first victims of this tragedy. Canada's commitment to provide humanitarian aid remains unshakable. Getting aid to civilians is essential.
It's a really good reader.
We implore all parties to protect
Even
civilians.
puts his head up sometimes.
And to, in all circumstances, maintain their commitments towards upholding international humanitarian law.
It's a little low key though, little boring.
Toronto's housing crisis is out of control, worsened by the loss of thousands of affordable homes by both conservative and liberal governments. Asylum seekers were left homeless this summer while the City of Toronto had to carry the weight of housing them. This federal government promised $97 million in assistance, but Toronto hasn't received it yet. Why are all the Toronto Liberal MPs so ineffective and unable to convince their own Prime Minister to deliver Toronto the help they need?
I don't know what to think about Jagmeet. He could break up this government.
Speaker, and I've
just convince his
had the
party.
opportunity to speak to Mayor Chow to address the interim needs, obviously with winter coming, to make sure people have a roof over their heads. It's work we need to do with the Ontario government, with the City of Toronto, with the GTA generally, because we know that asylum seekers are being spread out into all those areas, and they need to have a roof over their head for winter. But clearly, what we need to see from the City of Toronto is the actual receipts. We've asked Mayor Chow for the receipts. We're glad to pay for those receipts once we receive them. Thank you.
It's a challenge there to balance immigration with housing, right?
Try that answer on someone who has to live on the streets. L'histoire de Jeannette Chiasson.
Jeannette Chiasson, 76
I had
years
great
old,
hope for Jagmeet, man.
evicted.
Did you? Let me down.
Forced
This coalition government.
to find a smaller apartment, less well adapted, and more expensive. That's unacceptable. That's the result of the Conservatives and Liberals who have failed to get more affordable housing available. What does this government have to say to the thousands of people like her?
On paper, a coalition government should
The
work,
Honourable Minister.
but it doesn't.
I thank my colleague for his question. One thing he could do to help Canadians, one thing, and that's a vote for the Affordability Act.
No,
Why?
that's not the thing.
Because not only will that change how competition runs in the country, it will remove GST for new housing builds. I implore the opposition, all members of this House, to vote in favour of Canadians, because Canadians really need it.
Think about how much fun he's going to be when he's the opposition leader. He'll be an animal
After 8
out there.
long years of this Liberal
Yeah.
government doubling the
Jazz
national
Raj,
debt,
right?
doubling mortgage and rental costs,
Yeah.
Canadians could also see a 40% increase in their
Very
monthly
well
mortgage
said.
costs.
One of the best.
This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. 85% of variable rate mortgage holders believe they are worse off. Liberal inflation, fueled by liberal deficits, made the most rapid interest rate hikes ever. And now Canada's most at risk in the G7 for a mortgage default crisis. When will the Prime Minister rein in his inflationary spending in so interest rates can come down and Canadians can keep a roof over their heads?
And I'm worried about my house. My next time I negotiate my mortgage, my interest rate is going to be. It's going to be no negotiating about it.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. As you know, Mr.
dying,
Speaker,
huh?
Canada has the lowest deficit among all G7 countries. Canada has been reaffirmed as AAA credit rating because our fiscal frame is responsible. But, Mr. Speaker, we continue to support Canadians, and the Conservatives continue to call for cuts. You see, Canadian families are relying on the supports that we provide, are relying on the Canada Child Benefit, are relying on their pensions, Mr. Speaker, and the Conservatives' plan is to cut all of those supports to Canadians who need them.
Yeah, it's tough.
Responsible. This finance minister can't even drive responsibly, and they want us to believe that she's fiscally
It's taking a pot shot.
Many Canadians
Good one.
are uncomfortably
She got
close
caught
to
on
broke,
speeding
according to an MNP
recently.
survey, with more than 50% of Canadians $200 away from insolvency. After 8 years of failed Liberal policies, they're just not worth the cost. There's young Canadians and fixed senior incomes living in their cars and under bridges in tents. That's the state of Canada after 8 years of their failed policies. Will this
Living in
Prime
tents
Minister
all
balance
around
the
this
budget,
city.
get inflation and interest rates down so more Canadians don't have to live out on the streets?
What is it about him? Like, do you like him? like listening to him speak. If you read from the paper, I don't know why it doesn't bother me.
Speaker,
Because
I've
for
been a
everybody
member
else.
of Parliament since
Peter.
2015. From day one, that side has pursued an austerity agenda. Canada Child Benefit, they want to cut it. Supports for seniors, they've never been there. Supports for businesses during the pandemic and since, they've never been there. We brought down taxes for small businesses not once but twice. They opposed it every single time, Mr. Speaker. We're helping cities with public transit, with other infrastructure. They are not there. They're not worth the risk, Mr. Speaker.
He's well spoken, Peter.
Mr. Speaker, a survey released this morning by financial firm Edward Jones Canada said Canadians are stuck in a chaotic whirlwind of personal financial stress. The poll clearly shows that Canadians are preoccupied with just getting through the day, and that the idea of paying debt feels like a distant dream. Wow. It found 88% of Canadians saying their personal financial situation is affecting their well-being. This Prime Minister is just not worth the cost. When will the Prime Minister stop his inflationary spending so people can take back control of their lives?
She's a good speaker as well. I love how they shoot the dirty look for so long. They're talking to the speaker, but they're looking at the person that they're directing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I invite the member opposite to listen to some of the testimony from experts at this morning's Finance Committee who refute those statements. But, Mr. Speaker, I would like to get back to the legislation that is before this chamber, because the Conservatives have an opportunity to help stabilize grocery prices across this country. That is legislation that they can vote on, Mr. Speaker, right now in order to support Canadians. It also includes a measure to help stimulate the construction of more homes across this country, Mr. Speaker. Another way the Conservatives can actually help Canadians.
I don't know about that. It's hard to trust her because she's Freeland's right hand.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's been 8 years, and what the Liberal member opposite is saying does not match the facts. The Liberal deficit spending has increased inflation, which has increased interest rates. Right. A resident from my community said food prices have risen so quickly that she's been left to praying that her garden will be enough to supplement their household of 4 teenagers. You know, I used to hear from residents saying that they were hoping that they could save for a home one day, and now I'm hearing from residents saying that they're praying for a bountiful harvest to feed their family. This Prime Minister is just not worth the cost. When will the NDP Liberal government end their inflationary spending so people can feed their families?
I'm lucky I got my spot when I did. I bought my spot 9 years ago. It's got right in there.
I'd like to thank our colleague for the question. I mean, we all feel for what she said, Mr. Speaker, but instead of having words, why don't we talk about action, Mr. Speaker? There is one thing that the opposition can do, Mr. Speaker. Not many, I agree, but there's one thing. They can vote for the affordability bill. If she really cares about the lady that she refers, why don't she convince her caucus to vote for the affordability bill so they can do something once for Canadians?
He's a wild one, but he should mind his own caucus. Greg Fergus got his ass handed to him yesterday by Poilievre and Scheer. It was funny.
After 8 years of inflationary Liberal deficits, cost of living is going up everywhere, but it's worse in Quebec. Nearly 5% inflation. That's the highest in Canada. Everything costs more. Interest rates going up. Young people are losing their dreams of owning a home. And you know what? The Bloc Quebecois isn't helping either. They want to radically increase the carbon tax. It's expensive to vote for the Bloc. Will the Liberal government admit that it's time to stop taxing Canadians and Quebecers more?
It takes Luke a while to get going. Like right there, he was pretty calmed down, pretty chilled out, but the next time he speaks, he might be flipping.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to remind my honourable colleague that Quebec was the first to set up its own cap-and-trade system for carbon more than a decade ago, well before the federal government did it, well before the provinces did it. If my colleague has trouble understanding that system, I'd be happy to explain to him how Quebec's system is unique in Canada and one of the first in North America.
Parle français.
The honourable member from Mégantic-Lérard.
Okay,
You know what Quebecers understand? They understand that when they go to the grocery store and they pay 23% more for food than
They don't
3
do that
years
shot
ago.
very often.
They know, they understand,
Zumo.
they see that the carbon tax has a direct impact on how that food is transported, how it's produced. They see the effect of the Liberal Bloc tax that they want to increase when it's time for them to pay for food at the grocery store. More and more Quebecers are going to food banks, and they are middle-class Quebecers. Are they not ashamed of this, or are they just going to keep taxing them? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I thank my colleague from Mégantic Éclairable for the question.
Speaker. He's going to be fun.
But for all the people in
leader.
Mégantic Élairable watching us now, there's one thing their representative can do. It's to convince Conservative MPs to vote for the Affordability Act. And why? Because we're going to change competition. We're going to give more power to the Competition Bureau. We're going to focus on practices that don't help consumers. I want him to do his job and convince his colleagues to vote for this once and for all.
Look at him. He's funny. He's a wild clown, guys.
The Honourable Member for Joliette.
We got a
Yesterday,
hippie version of Harry Potter. There's a few Harry Potters.
Request, which was a plan to come back to balance books. We're not asking for the moon. We're not asking to cut services to balance the books. We're just asking for a plan. Everyone knows the start of the saying from Émile de Girardin: to govern is to plan ahead. But he added that not planning ahead puts you on the road to ruin. The Liberals are running fast, like gazelles. All we want is a plan. Is that really too much to ask?
Interesting tie he had on.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr.
floor
Speaker.
time today,
I would
Benaya.
like to thank my colleague from the Bloc Quebecois, who sits on the Finance Committee, for his work on that committee. I would answer that our deficit is the lowest among G7 countries.
It's a terrible argument.
But 0.7% of our GDP is involved in that debt. It's very low. Our fall economic update is coming. The Minister of Finance will reveal everything to Canadians at that time.
Holy.
The Honourable Member.
What she's saying there, all those numbers don't add up. Just saying.
Not only do they not have a plan for the future, but new ministers don't have any mandate letters. Ministers appointed in July don't have their letters, and months later, they still don't know how to orient their work. There's talk about a new minister for the Treasury Board, the one who holds the purse strings, and she still doesn't have a mandate letter. Public services, defense, transport, justice, official languages, the list goes on. When is the Prime Minister going to give them their mandates? The Honourable Minister. I would like to thank my honourable colleague for his question.
The most wound up I've ever seen her when she stood up last time.
The mandate letters have not changed for the new ministers. So all the ministers know exactly what they need to do. And those letters are public. Thank you.
Short and sweet there, Karina.
The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, there's a human cost to governing on autopilot. The Auditor General confirmed that more than half of immigrant applications for permanent residence are being processed late. For refugees, there's almost a 3-year wait. It can even stretch out to 4 years for spousal sponsorships. The federal government, in the meantime, is raising its immigration thresholds, even though it's unable to serve the people it's supposed to be welcoming now. These are people. Will the federal government stop treating immigrants like numbers? The Honourable Minister. A very good question, Mr. Speaker.
Mark, what you got?
What I would like to highlight is the Auditor General emphasized that a great deal of progress has been made. That's what we expect from the public service. There's been progress made between the date of the report and now, and that's what I expect. For refugees, we obviously need to do better. And when it comes to the digital transition, we're going to be making announcements in November. Thank you.
He's clowns.
After 8 years of this NDP Liberal government, Canadians are literally in housing hell. A Canadian couple with a 6,300 square foot mansion in France on 37 acres, if they sold it, they can't afford to move back to Fergus, Ontario. Wow. This NDP Liberal government is not worth the cost. And yet every day they stand up, puff up their chest to tell Canadians what a great job they've done. Why don't they stop gaslighting Canadians and admit they've broken housing in Canada?
Good one, Kyle. That's a good zipper. It was funny yesterday, guys. Greg Fergus got the speaker, and I like the speaker. He's a nice guy.
Speaker, if we're going to tackle the housing crisis, we have to work together and pursue agendas that are serious. This government has put forward a number of measures. For example, lifting GST on purpose-built rentals, period. That side is proposing a tax on the building of middle-class rentals.
Shameful. Middle class shouldn't be renting, right?
Individuals and families, that construction would be taxed by that side. They also don't want to work with municipalities. We put $4 billion on the table for that. They want to cut all of that. We need to build more. We will build more on this side, not with that approach.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't think so.
The honourable member for Dufferin-Caledon.
The housing crisis is we should support more of their failed policies. That's their answer, Mr. Speaker. It's a special kind of incompetence. If you don't have a house, you can't afford it. If you have a house, you can't afford to keep it because interest rates are so high from their inflationary deficits. Mr. Speaker, and yet they keep spending and spending and spending, and interest rates go up and up and up, and Canadians are at risk of losing their homes. Will they get these inflationary deficits under control so Canadians actually don't lose their home?
Scary times.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Reminders, it's no problem. When they were in office, and that leader now, that opposition leader was the so-called Minister of Housing.
If I could ask the member from Dufferin-Caledon who had just asked a question to please let the Parliamentary Secretary respond to his question. From the top, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
As I was saying, they need reminders, Mr. Speaker. The Harper government had put $300 million towards housing. You know how many homes were built, Mr. Speaker? Less than 100. At a time when it's clear that the lack of supply has created an increase, a vast increase in the cost of rent, this government is moving forward to build more, to help the private sector do exactly that. That side, as I just said, wants to tax the construction of rentals for the middle class. Shameful. On top of that, they don't want to work with municipalities to get the results we need. It's not a serious agenda. It's a reckless agenda on the other side.
I don't agree with all of it, but if that's true about the $300 million in 100 houses.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, this Liberal NDP government blew $1.5 billion on bureaucracy, and the homeless crisis has never been worse. A quarter of the homeless are seniors, and this is only an estimate. The real number is much higher. With ballooning interest rates, rising food costs, and the housing crisis, this Prime Minister is just not worth the cost. When will this Prime Minister start caring about monetary policies so seniors that built our country are not left out on the street?
It must be tough if you were retired, and there's nothing you can do to make more money.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker,
that's why you see so many people working.
Seniors since 2015. And these efforts have reduced poverty for seniors over 65. The facts are the GIS increase helped lift 45,000 seniors out of poverty. Restoring the age of retirement back to 65 prevented 100,000 seniors from falling into severe poverty, against the wishes of the other side, I should say. And these benefits are automatically adjusted to keep up with the cost of living, and they will never go down. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Seamus is lost with a teleprompter, so he has to read off a page.
First Nations for decades have screamed about the deplorable conditions they live in. Statistics Canada now confirms that this Liberal government failed to make any progress since 2016. Under the Liberals, Indigenous peoples have no choice but to live in unsafe, overcrowded, and mold-infested homes. The $4 billion over 7 years towards urban, rural, northern housing is not enough. When will the Liberals act so that Indigenous peoples have safe homes to live in?
Indigenous people don't have safe places, but we're trying to help Ukraine out a lot.
Mr. Speaker, since 2015, we've worked with First Nations partners to address the shocking and appalling housing gap that exists on First Nations. And indeed, over 33,000 units of housing have been built or renovated since that time, Mr. Speaker. We continue to invest in affordable housing, not just for First Nations people, but certainly for Indigenous people in urban, rural, northern communities. Mr. Speaker, compare that to the record of the Leader of Opposition. For $350 million, 99 houses built. We can do better as a country, Mr. Speaker, and that's what we're doing.
She seems like she doesn't even want to be there. That's the vibe I get from her.
Is raking in billions in profits.
Charlie Angus?
Corporate rap sheet is a long list of disturbing allegations. Environmental damage, workers killed on the job, price fixing at the pump. But the blockbuster lawsuit in the state of Colorado is new. The Colorado indictment is clear. Suncor, quote, knowingly and substantially contributed to the climate crisis through intentional, reckless, and negligent conduct. My friends, this is the big tobacco moment for Suncor. So what will this minister do to hold this company to a court and make sure that they reduce emissions to protect our children's future?
Charlie's entertaining, and it's a good point. Suncor, they don't care. They openly disregard environmental change.
I share the concern of my honourable colleague. The leader of an important company like Suncor should be working with us to help fight climate change in a time where we're seeing record heat, record floodings all around the world, including in this country, record forest fires, record hurricanes. We need everyone to step up to the plate. We know it won't be the Conservative Party, but we're counting on all the leaders in this country, except the Conservative Party, to work with us to ensure that Canada does its fair share when it comes to fighting climate change.
It's entertaining, guys. It's fun. It's fun. Like, subscribe.
Northern communities already face higher costs of goods like food and fuel than Canadians in the South. And with high inflation, these costs are building even more. Our government, though, is taking action to support the middle class and those working hard to join it. This week, our government announced new measures to reduce costly banking fees for Canadians. Can the President of the Treasury Board please tell us, this House, how these new measures will help make life more affordable for Northerners and Canadians alike?
Good question.
Mr. Speaker, unlike the Conservatives, we are taking a responsible and balanced approach to fiscal management. Just this week, we announced new measures to ensure Canadians are treated fairly by their banks. These measures include protecting Canadians from rising mortgage payments, enhancing low-cost banking options, lowering non-sufficient fund NSF fees, ensuring that Canadians have an impartial advocate when they have complaints against their banks. Mr. Speaker, today and every day is a great day to fight for Canadians, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
She got fired up that time. Got to give her that. Give her a couple of years, though. She'll be able to make that lemon face that Chrystia Freeland makes. With that, she's already kind of got the voice for it. And Greg Fergus, let it go, Greg. Let it go. Come on. Let them proceed. He's just up there standing like lurch.
It's this simple.
Oh, John is fine.
On farmers, on truckers, on processors means higher food costs for Canadians. Canadian farmers will pay close to $1 billion in carbon taxes alone by 2030. After 8 years of this NDP Liberal government, this Prime Minister isn't worth the cost. But Conservatives are bringing forward common sense solution, like legislation that will exempt the carbon tax from on-farm fuels like natural gas and propane. But the Liberals are trying to kill this bill at the Senate, despite all party support here in the House and in the Senate. Why is this Prime Minister fighting so hard to make sure that food and farming remains unaffordable?
Good question.
It's all connected. You can't tax carbon this way and not think that
Minister.
masses aren't going to pay for it. All right. Well, you got a little confused
I'd like to
there.
take this opportunity to remind all members that until they're recognized by the chair, that the microphones won't go on. The Honourable Minister.
Holy cow. Well, Greg. Greg's out of control, guys.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I appreciate my honourable colleague's question, but I think he fully understands that the climate, farmers fully depend on what happens in the climate. When in Prince Edward Island we had a Hurricane Fiona, it blew warehouses down, it blew dairy barns down, it killed cattle. In Western Canada, which my honourable colleague is from, straw is worth $300 a bale. In the prairies, it burnt and they had floods. Quite simply, Mr. Speaker, if we do not deal with the climate, we will not ever do anything about the price of food or be able to help farmers. We will continue to address the climate issue in this country.
Think he was a big climate advocate like 60 years ago?
Député de Foothills.
Well, ironically, the Liberals set aside $300 million to ACOA to deal with Fiona for farmers, but not a single dime has gone out the door. But all parties in this House supported this legislation. Even the Greens understand how important farming is. Wow. After 8 years of higher interest rates and inflationary costs, and now not one but two carbon taxes, this Prime Minister is simply not worth the cost. The Prime Minister is fanning the flames of inflation with yet another carbon tax on Canadian farmers. Right. Why will this Prime Minister not respect the will of this House and axe his farm-killing carbon tax?
You know what's worse than the carbon tax? A second, a third, a fourth carbon tax. One is more than enough.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my honourable colleague is correct. Fiona did incredible damage, and I'm proud that as the minister responsible for ACOA, the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency, we did receive $300 million. $100 million of that has gone to small craft harbours. There was $40 million that has gone to Parks Canada.
Good
we
for
now
her.
have
She's
a
not on
program
paper
the
at
table
all.
That is offering funding to build climate centres. I think there's $9 million left in the fund. I'd be glad to give the honourable member details. I'll get back to him on that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
That's not too bad, lady.
If I could just remind members, please, to restrict your
Come
comments
on,
to the time
Greg.
that you actually
Enough
have the
is
floor
enough.
to ask
Imagine
a
how
question
quiet it must be at his
or
house.
to answer a question. The honourable member
Looks like
from
Tuva from
Dauphin,
Star Trek
Swan River,
Enterprise.
Nipawin.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years as Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Canadians can't afford to drive their cars or heat their homes. But that doesn't matter to this NDP Liberal government. After forcing Canadians to pay costly carbon tax, they are plowing ahead with a second carbon tax. Earlier this week, the Minister's Department told the Environment Committee the Liberals knew that their clean fuel regulations would cost Canadians more. Will this government finally admit that their second carbon tax is not worth the cost?
Just peel it back. Get rid of it. Making it impossible for farmers to do their job.
Jill, in the writing of the member from Regina Capel. She recently shared that she gets more money back than she pays out, and it helps her at the grocery store.
I don't believe that.
Mr. Speaker, she doesn't want the carbon pricing rebate to go away. Why would Conservative Party of Canada cut this program from Jill, Mr. Speaker?
How are you guys doing on your rebates? How are you doing? They don't hurt, but the programs that cause the rebates do hurt. Like my grocery rebate was $70. That's not even an order of. Come on, Greg, stop it. Okay, everybody, who wants Greg to just let them proceed? There we go. The Conservatives are getting wound up. Rick Perkins, you can see him over there. He's having a good time.
Order.
Dread to tell. Yeah, they're having a great time. Rachel Thomas.
Order.
You can see them if you look closely. You can see the Liberals are on this side.
We'd all love to get letters. The honourable member from Dauphin, Swan River, Nipawin.
Mr. Speaker, these are the words from the government's own impact assessment on their clean fuel regulations. Quote, the regulations are estimated to increase the price of gasoline and diesel. Quote, low-income households may be disproportionately affected by regulations. Quote, rural Canadians may have limited opportunity to reduce their fuel consumption in response to higher fuel prices. Why did the government ignore their own advice and plow ahead with a second carbon tax?
It's a good question. If they knew, then you're screwing over your poorer people. That's not the way to save the environment.
If the Conservatives have a problem with my accent in English, I'll answer in French.
Something must have happened on the floor.
That he had just received his rebate, and this year he'll get $720. So that's over $13 a week. Bob says he's getting more money back thanks to this rebate, and he's calling on us and the Conservative Party to keep this rebate alive.
If there's any truth to that, which there can't be,
the honourable member for Abbotsford.
Then what is the purpose of the tax if you're paying back more in rebates than you?
Finally, Canada's making a name for itself on the international stage. Canada has just been nominated for the Anti-Noble Purpose Award by a Connecticut university for its refusal to hold a public inquiry into sexual misconduct in sports. The federal government has been promising such an inquiry for over a year. The Liberals even had time to swap out the Minister of Sports, but they didn't have time to launch the inquiry to ensure the safety of athletes, especially women. It was already a disgrace, and now, with this award, it's an international disgrace. When will the government launch a public inquiry?
I don't know much about that situation.
The Honourable Parliamentary
Sexuality
Secretary.
in sports,
Thank you,
sexual
Mr.
conduct
Speaker.
in sports.
I'd like to thank my colleague, my honourable colleague, for that question and for his work on this very important issue. It is crucial to proceed with systematic reforms to the culture of sports. Our sports system involves our children, and we expect leaders and coaches and so on to be accountable. A lot of work has been done, and there's still more underway. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
He looks like Justin Terrell.
Do you know what I'm talking about? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
He's a writer and actor.
It's always the same with the Liberals. They make announcements when they feel the heat, and then they drop the ball. It's been a year since the former Minister of Sports promised a public inquiry into sexual misconduct in sports. After a year of inaction, the Prime Minister didn't find fault with her. He promoted her. Mr. Speaker, Canada could have been a world leader in the fight against sexual misconduct in sports, like it has been in fighting doping. Instead, Canada gets nominated for an Ig Nobel Award. Mr. Speaker, when is this government going to get to work for the victims?
Who are the victims in that situation? I really just don't know. Like, obviously, the
Mr.
victims
Speaker,
of some
once
assault or
again,
something, but I don't know the situation he's discussing.
I'd like to thank my colleague for the question.
I like his tie. He's always wearing a tie clip.
Undertaken the work to create a safe sports framework in Canada. We're taking steps around sporting safety, including the Office of the Sports Integrity Ombudsman, and also to make it easier for victims to report abuse. Canada is a leader, Mr. Speaker, in making Canada's sporting system safer. Thank you. The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of Liberal government, everything is more expensive. And the Liberal government, with the enthusiastic support of the Bloc, has invented and implemented a second carbon tax. And that's why, Mr. Speaker,
Gerard
a
is
vote
fun
for
too.
the
Silver
Bloc
Fox
will cost you. And now the department admits it hasn't even assessed the impact by region. So transit is an example. Can the Bloc explain why they agree with this second
fired up.
Carbon tax?
It's one of my favorites. I can't help it. So intense, man.
The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd be pleased to explain to my honourable colleague that Quebec does not have a carbon tax. They use a cap-and-trade system. And the standard for clean fuels that we implemented was one of the Conservative commitments in the 2021 election campaign. The difference is they only talk about it, whereas we here on this side, we do things.
They're not necessarily good things, though, Stephen.
Mr. Speaker, I'd be happy to explain to the Minister that the first Liberal carbon tax does have impacts in Quebec because things bought from outside Quebec are affected by the carbon tax. And there's not that much transit in regions versus Montreal, but the fact is that Quebecers are going to have to pay the second carbon tax when it comes to transit. How does the government explain that to people?
He's on fire, man. He's one of my favorites for sure. And now Greg Fergus is going to try to ruin it. Sit the hell down, bud. It's enough. It's enough. Yeah, he stalled him yesterday for 20 minutes, and then he got blasted. I've got videos. You can check them out. It was interesting. I've got short ones, too, so you can see it like
Mr. Speaker, I have a lot of respect for my honourable colleague from Louis Saint Laurent and for all the viewers from that riding. But the people in La Tuque expect one thing. They expect the member for Louis Saint Laurent to be, they know that he's a reasonable man, that he speaks on behalf of the Conservative caucus. He's an influential man. So I'm sure that he will convince his colleagues once and for all to vote for Canadians and to support our affordability legislation. That's the best way to help Canadians.
Affordability Act. I don't think so, but you're entertaining, but I'm going to have to stop you at that.
Order, colleagues.
I missed the days of Anthony Rota. Like there was only a short time.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this Liberal government, they go and introduce a second carbon tax without even assessing regional impacts. With the help of the Bloc Quebecois, who want to radically increase this carbon tax, voting with the government twice, the Bloc isn't thinking about Quebecers who are struggling to make ends meet. A vote for the Bloc will cost you at the grocery store, at the pumps, and when you're looking for a roof to put over your head. Mr. Speaker, this Liberal government is washed up. So why is the Bloc supporting the costly carbon tax that's hurting Canadians and Quebecers?
Man. Good for you. Good for you. Lighten it up. Did you see that? He threw the paper. Jacques Gourde, eh? Can you see Dozaki's behind me? This shoulder? See Dozaki's right here? The world's most interesting man, that's Pablo. And Greg is just stalling here, guys. I don't know why.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for his question, but what's hurting is the interpreter's ears, Mr. Speaker. What he doesn't understand is that Canadians watching us in Lévis and other places, people are watching and they're wondering, will the Conservatives for once in their lives, vote in favor of Canadians and helping them out with affordability? Because on this side of the House, it's clear. Will they, for once in their lives, vote for Canadians, yes or no?
He is going to be a fun opposition leader. I've mentioned, I think that he'll be the next leader of the Liberal Party. After the Liberals lose the next election, if they do, which I think that's the mood of Canada now, that Trudeau will resign, retire, and he'll slip in. Strong French vote. He's well-spoken. He's entertaining. Big, important minister of
the honourable
innovation,
member for Lac
science,
Saint Louis. Mr. Speaker,
industry.
As we all know, Canada is in the midst of a housing crisis, and our government is hard at work to resolve it. We've put forward Bill C-56 to kickstart new housing projects by eliminating the GST.
Yeah.
But
who wants that?
As we speak, the bill is still being debated in the House, and the help for Canadians all across the country is getting held up. Can the Minister of Employment and Workforce Development tell the House how this bill will help Canadians who are hard hit by the housing crisis?
Du logement.
See, again, this isn't my favorite part of question
Speaker,
period.
I'd like to thank my colleague for Lac St. Louis for his question. Bill C-56 will accelerate housing construction all across the country
Randy's
and
a
create
simple
quality
clown. He's not very
jobs.
smart.
And we know that investing in housing construction reduces inequalities, Mr. Speaker, and helps build strong communities. But once again, the Conservatives are filibustering and refusing to support this bill. They're against social development and against housing construction, or are they just caught up in their own political games and they can't see that Canadians need help? My question is, will they help Canadians, yes or no?
I was watching, I released a video today of Poilievre and Randy going toe-to-toe, and Randy got his tail handed to him.
Canada's closest intelligence allies have already clarified the record. This government has not. So I'm going to give the government an opportunity to correct and clarify the record. Will the government clearly state that the Israel Defense Forces and the State of Israel were not responsible for the explosion at the hospital in Gaza on Tuesday?
It's a weird thing that they haven't announced that. It's just a sin what happened at that hospital to those poor people. Did you see that?
Mr. Speaker, what happened
Melanie
in
Joly
Gaza
will try to make it better.
absolutely devastating. Palestinian civilians, Israeli civilians are equal and must be protected. You've heard the Prime Minister earlier today. Canada and its allies are working to determine exactly what happened, and Canadians deserve answers.
Canadians do deserve answers. I don't know what happened, but I don't know who's to blame for that attack. I just feel for the people.
Cypress Hills grassland.
Well, Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this Prime Minister, Canada has lost its reputation as a world leader in energy production. After telling Germany, Japan, and France that there's no business case for LNG, Qatar is now the supplier of choice for our G7 allies. This is the same Qatar that is housing the leadership of Hamas, the terrorist organization that is murdering innocent Israelis and Palestinians. Will the Prime Minister admit that there is not only a business case for LNG, but a moral one as well?
If you think Hamas is the worst, Hamas is the worst, give us a like, subscribe. We don't like Hamas here.
Mr. Speaker, it's just shameful to be
Hubba,
drawing
hubba.
that type of a conspiracy
What
theory
the?
when we're talking about such sensitive issues. But let's talk
You go,
about how
Julie.
we are actually supporting our allies, because the facts are important. We are actually working with all
It's
of
Friday
our allies
somewhere.
in providing green hydrogen, in providing nuclear technologies. We are there to support our allies when they come looking to us for support. And I would ask the member opposite, if he cares so much about clean energy, why did he vote against supporting the creation of wind, offshore wind in our Atlantic provinces? It creates good paying jobs and clean energy.
Good job.
Interesting dress for Parliament.
Député de Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
At least $38 million of a $1 billion green slush fund is under investigation for conflicts of interest and gross mismanagement. It's another example of corruption and scandal, and Canadians want to know who got rich. After 8 years of this NDP Liberal government, we have whistleblowers who are seeking career and legal protection for bringing Canadians' attention to this latest example of government waste and abuse. This Prime Minister is simply not worth the cost. So Canadians want to know which BFF or family member or former staffer or Liberal lobbyist got rich.
Michael's well-spoken.
None have been missed.
Speaker, again, we need to rectify the facts, Mr. Speaker. I think there will be a number of small and medium-sized businesses in the country in the energy space and the environmental space which will be shocked by this comment, Mr. Speaker. What we did the responsible thing. The moment we had allegation of wrongdoing, Mr. Speaker, we hired an independent third-party expert to investigate. Once we got the result of the investigation, Mr. Speaker, we took action, Mr. Speaker, and we demanded from that agency, like we would demand from all agencies of the Government of Canada, to have the highest standard of governance. That's what Canadians expected. That's what we did, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Nepean.
Mr. Speaker, this week is Small Business Week. Small businesses employ about 10 million Canadians and contribute
Chandra
about
is doing,
40% of the
this
GDP.
is one of my least favorite parts of this. This is when the government asks the government about what they're doing. Like the Liberal Party asks the Liberals, but they always do a very boring hack job.
It's an opportunity to celebrate them.
But watch.
Could the minister
Boring
responsible
question,
for the Federal
boring answer.
Economic Development Agency for Ontario tell the House how we are supporting our hardworking small business owners and entrepreneurs across Canada?
Okay, how are we helping our businesses was the question.
L'honorable ministre.
And
thank you, Mr. Speaker.
could have done it.
Small
Look,
businesses
she knew the question
are
was
heart
coming.
of Canadian
Straight
communities,
from
and
paper.
our government is delighted to support small
Lazy.
businesses like Madoaki Farm, which I had the pleasure of visiting with the member from Nepean. They offer a unique Indigenous experience and a marketplace for local Indigenous entrepreneurs. Our government is going to continue to support entrepreneurs and small business owners so they can reach their potential and develop new possibilities for Canadians. Thank you to all our small businesses across Canada for your commitment, for your dedication and hard work. Happy Small Business Week.
Happy Small Business Week.
L'honorable député de Skeena Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, on Tuesday, several water main breaks saw torrents of water pouring down the streets of Prince Rupert and flooding people's homes. Now there's a citywide boil water advisory, and this isn't the first time. Last December, the city had to declare a state of emergency due to its failing water infrastructure. So this is a port city, Mr. Speaker, that is critical to Canada's supply chain and our economy. Will the minister stand and speak directly to the people of Prince Rupert and assure them that timely federal help is on its way?
Did you know about that?
The member understands that all questions and answers should be directed through the chair, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for the question, an important question at that. We know the people of Prince Rupert are facing serious water challenges, and we're closely monitoring the situation. Through the Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund, we're helping communities protect their critical infrastructure while reducing long-term costs associated with replacing infrastructure following natural disasters. The minister has been working with Mayor Pond as well as the province on Prince Rupert's application through the fund to address its water challenges. We will always have the backs of the people of Prince Rupert, and we'll share more on this as soon as we can. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Looks like Andrew Scheer, he was funny looking.
L'honorable député de Kitchener Centre.
Mr. Speaker, through the height of the pandemic, small businesses in my community, from Big Bliss Yoga to Full Circle Foods, did all we asked of them. Now, during Small Business Week, they need more than a selfie. They need time to ensure before what they thought was a grant will get turned into another loan they'll have to repay, and 18 days previously announced isn't good enough. If this government's got $30 billion for a pipeline that's only going to accelerate their own extinction, will they not step up for small businesses when they need it the most?
Okay, good job. Good job. The poor Green parties, right? Green Party MPs. There's so few of them.
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We understand the struggles that many small business owners had during the pandemic and that many continue to face. That is why we are offered additional flexibilities for small business to repay their CEBA loans. This includes a full 1-year extension on the term loan repayment deadline, more flexibility on refinancing, and more time, Mr. Speaker, to access the loan forgiveness, which is both a balanced and a fiscally responsible approach. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
It's interesting. It's interesting that he's a secretary.
Je comprends qu'il y a un appel au règlement. L'honorable député de l'honorable La Pointe-de-L'Île.
The honourable member for La Pointe-de-L'Île, rising on a point of order. Mr. Speaker.
Oh, that's it, guys. That is the show. So it was fun. It's always fun. It's entertaining. We're learning, finding out what the issues are. I'm having a good time with it. I hope that you are as well. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow with more Question Period Canada. I'm Ehren. Like, subscribe, comment. It'd be wonderful if you did. Let me know what you think, what you'd like to see, what you want me to stop doing. That's it. Thank you very much for watching. We'll catch you next time. For this evening, we're out. We're out soon.